What if I told you that one of the greatest Yoruba cities didn't fall because of some massive foreign invasion, but actually collapsed from the inside out in a devastating betrayal? Think about it. What if the warriors who literally threw open the gates of Ilorin fully believed they were fighting for religious reform, while others watched in horror, seeing it as the tragic hijacking of West African history? Today, we are cracking open the archives on a highly controversial historical cold case. We're going to examine the hard evidence, track the military movements, and uncover the dramatic story of exactly how a frontier Yoruba town transformed overnight into an emirate of the Sokoto Caliphate. It's a massive shift that permanently altered the map and the history of Nigeria. So here is the core mystery I want you to weigh the evidence on with me today. As an investigative historian poring over these events, the records pull us in completely different directions. Was the Fulani conquest of Ilorin a holy jihad against a corrupt system? Was it a calculated political revolution capitalizing on a crumbling state? Or was it one of the most infamous acts of betrayal ever recorded? We are going to look at this totally objectively. We're laying out the facts, the timelines, and the conflicting narratives so you can play jury and decide for yourself. But hey, before we pull back the curtain and really dig into these historical archives, make sure you smash that subscribe button. If you love deep dive historical documentaries that look at the facts without taking sides, you're definitely going to want to stick around for this entire analysis. Part 1. Anatomy of an Empire. Oyo's Vulnerable Frontiers. Okay, picture this. It's the end of the 18th century. The Great Oyo Empire is one of the absolute powerhouses of West Africa. But its sprawling borders made it incredibly vulnerable. And understand why, you have to look at the sheer geographical brilliance of Ilorin's location. It sits right on the dividing line. You've got the wide-open northern savanna on one side and the dense southern forests on the other. This terrain literally dictated all the military tactics in the region. Oyo's power relied heavily on its cavalry. And obviously, horses need open ground to maneuver and dominate those trade routes across the savanna. But cavalry, it's practically useless in a dense forest. So Ilorin acted as the ultimate strategic choke point. It was a heavily fortified military outpost positioned exactly where the terrain shifted, meant to protect Oyo's supply lines from northern threats. Basically, whoever controlled Ilorin controlled the military gateway to Yorubaland. But here's the catch. That gateway was deeply vulnerable, because the empire right behind it was completely falling apart. By the early 1800s, massive, unavoidable cracks had appeared in the Oyo Empire. And we aren't just talking about minor political squabbles here. The empire was collapsing under the weight of intense internal rivalries. You had provincial leaders actively seeking independence and hoarding resources. Add the absolute devastation of slave raids and relentless civil conflicts to the mix, and you've got a superpower crumbling from within. The supply lines were fracturing, the central authority was losing its grip, the soil was literally perfectly tilled for rebellion. Part 2. The Rebel and the Scholar.
Into this atmosphere of absolute chaos, two central figures step onto the stage. And it is crucial we understand our first guy, Afanja. He held the title of Are Anakanfo, which made him the supreme military commander of the Oyo Empire. This title gave him immense, almost terrifying military power, but it came with a really dangerous catch. He was expected to lead continuous military campaigns and was actually forbidden by law from living permanently in the imperial capital. So, stationed out in the strategic outpost of Ilorin, Afanja grew incredibly resentful of the Alaafin, the ruler of Oyo. The archives tell us tensions completely boiled over when Afanja allegedly refused a direct order to attack a sacred town. Driven by ambition, principle, or maybe a bit of both, Afanja made a shocking tactical move. He went rogue and declared Ilorin totally independent. But he wasn't foolish. He knew Oyo forces would come for him. He desperately needed allies.
Enter our second figure, a man who was not a warlord at all, but a scholar. Shehu Alimi was a Fulani Islamic cleric tied to the massive reform movements that were sweeping across Hausaland during the era of Osman Danfodio's jihad. Now, Alimi wasn't arriving with a massive standing army. He was a teacher, preaching Islamic renewal and moral reform. But his teachings attracted a deeply devout, highly mobilized following. Afanja, needing serious manpower to hold that geographic choke point of Ilorin against the coming Oyo retaliation, welcomed Alimi and his supporters right into the city. On paper, combining Afanja's brilliant military tactics with the fervent, unquestioning dedication of Alimi's followers looked like a masterstroke. And together, they actually did it. They successfully defeated the forces loyal to Oyo. But there was a fatal flaw hiding in plain sight. They had completely conflicting motivations.
Afonja envisioned an independent, secular Yoruban military state, with himself sitting at the top as the sole commander. But Alimi's followers? They saw themselves on a wholly religious mission. Their grand vision was to establish an Islamic state seamlessly aligned with the rapidly expanding Sokoto Caliphate. It was a partnership of sheer convenience, and it was destined to tear itself apart. Part 3. A fatal shift in power.
So this tactical alliance had succeeded in breaking Oyo's grip, but the internal balance of power was about to undergo a radical, incredibly violent shift. Track this rapid sequence of events with me. Ilorin goes from being an Oyo outpost to Afonja's independent stronghold to a shared power dynamic with Alimi. But then, the very allies Afonja had invited inside his own walls began to consolidate military and political influence. Afonja realized way too late that the actual command structure had slipped right through his fingers. A bitter, bloody struggle for control erupted in the streets of the city. And in a stunning climax, Afonja, the supreme military commander who had broken a massive empire just to rule Ilorin, was killed in the crossfire. He never lived to see what his independent city would become because the power transferred totally to Alimi's son of Salam.
The geopolitical map was instantly redrawn. Following Afonja's death, Emir Abdul Salam officially incorporated Ilorin into the Sokoto Caliphate, which was the largest state in 19th century West Africa. Just like that, the Yoruba military frontier was gone. In its place stood a brand new Islamic emirate, linked spiritually, politically, and economically to the north. Entirely new administrative systems were rolled out, and the northern trade networks were heavily strengthened.
Part 4. Betrayal or revolution? The modern debate.
So how exactly do we categorize what just happened? Well, modern Nigerian historians are fiercely divided on this, and here is the first major perspective. It's heavily rooted in traditional Yoruba narratives. This view frames the event as a calculated, devastating political betrayal and a foreign invasion. The argument here is pretty straightforward. Afonja, completely blinded by his ambition and hatred for Oyo, essentially handed the keys to the city to an invading force. In this light, the Fulani presence is viewed as an opportunistic takeover that hijacked a local rebellion, resulting in the tragic and illegitimate theft of a Yoruba city.
But contrast that with the revolution perspective. Other modern historians argue that calling it a simple betrayal completely ignores the agency of the local people who lived there. This perspective points out that, look, Oyo was already collapsing, and Ilorin was already highly multi-ethnic. They argue this was actually a genuine socio-political revolution driven by local Muslims who legitimately desired Islamic reform and much better governance compared to the crumbling, corrupt Oyo administration. So in this view, it wasn't an invasion at all. It was a natural, highly complex transition of power supported from the ground up. Part 5. Echoes of a Fallen Sea. Now, whichever perspective you personally lean toward, the aftermath is undisputed. The fall of Ilorin was not just an isolated incident. It was a geopolitical earthquake that triggered devastating, long-lasting ripple effects across the entire region. The loss of that crucial Ilorin choke point dramatically accelerated the total collapse of the Oyo Empire. Without their northern shield, the whole region basically descended into chaos. This single transition of power triggered the Yoruba Wars, literally decades of brutal, relentless civil conflict that completely reshaped the political boundaries of West Africa. Entire communities were displaced, fleeing shifting front lines. Old, dominant powers faded into dust, while new fortified cities had to rise up out of sheer necessity just to defend against the expanding power of the new Ilorin Emirate. And honestly, this is exactly why this specific historical period remains such an incredibly sensitive topic for current communities. Today, Ilorin is this fascinating anomaly. It is a city with a profoundly layered identity. It is undeniably Yoruba in its cultural heritage, yet deeply Islamic in its traditional governance. It literally stands as a cultural and geographical bridge between the north and the southwest of Nigeria. Every street, every tradition holds the living memory of both Afonja's rebellion and Alimi's revolution. You know, history rarely hands us simple heroes and villains. Instead, it shows us real people making incredibly complex choices based on ambition, faith, and the immediate terrain right in front of them. So I leave you, the jury, with this final provocative question. Was Afonja merely a tragic rebel whose blinded ambition invited the destruction of his own empire? Or was the crumbling state of Oyo always destined for a socio-political revolution, making the fall of Ilorin just an inevitable shift in the winds of history? I'd love to hear your take on this. Let me know what you think the evidence points to down in the comments. And if you enjoyed examining these archives with me today, please make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next historical documentary. Thank you so much for watching, and keep questioning history.